Okay, so we are here with Andrea Jurjević. I'm going to give a little introduction, and then she's going to read poetry for us, and we'll follow with a Q&A. And do let us know if you're here. We love to see that. Just say, I'm here in the chat room so we can see, because we can't see you. And yeah. Andrea Jurjević grew up in Rijeka, Croatia, and the former Yugoslavia before immigrating to the United States. Her debut poetry collection, Small Crimes, won the 2015 Philip Levine Poetry Prize. And her book-length translations from Croatian include Mama Safari and Dead Office Letters. It came out in 2018 and 2020. Her work has appeared or is forthcoming in The Believer, Tri-Quarterly, The Missouri Review, Gulf Coast, and the Southeast Review, among many others. She was a recipient of the Robinson Jeffers Tour Prize, a Tennessee Williams Scholarship from the Swanee Recipient Conference, a Hembridge Fellowship, and the 2018 Georgia Author of the Year Award. 4 of Andrea's poems appear in issue 85 of Willow Springs. Andrea lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and teaches at Georgia State University. So Willow Springs and Eastern Washington University would like to welcome you. And yay, everybody clap. Here's Andrea. And I'm just going to hide myself.
Thank you, Polly. Okay, this feels like talking to myself in an empty room, which is really what it is. Thank you, Polly, for the introduction and for inviting me to this reading. And thank you to everybody who is watching and listening and spending a wild pandemic Friday night on Zoom. I have put aside 10 poems to read for tonight, so you can count down. And more than anything, looking forward to the Q&A. So I'll start with a couple of translations first. The first one is from Mama Safari, and the book was written by Olja Savicević-Ivančević. She's a Croatian author, and in fact, just yesterday, her novel Adios Cowboy, which in the States was published by McSweeney's, in France just yesterday won the Best Foreign Novel Award. So that was really cool. I will read one poem from this book. The book is primarily about travel and adventure. Travel in the physical sense. There's a section talks about that is filled with these postcard poems from Istanbul, Turkey, and the other sections that talk about traveling through family history and going through different roles that women take throughout life. So this one is titled Mountain Ant, and there is one word you might not understand when I say it's rakia or rakia, and that is name a really, really strong drink. In Italy, it is called grappa. It's a little bit like brandy. And, in the old days, I think old people used to sometimes take a shot in the morning to get them starting for a day of work, basically. So Mountain Ant. We wondered where our aunt went with her dark face and blue eyes. She was already old, but never before had she left the village or the hamlet with Haleberry and beehive. Willful, fast, and skinny, carried a rooster on her shoulder, drank rakia for breakfast, could tear a hog for bacon and cursed a lot. Her stories were brilliant and her eyes bright. Where did that peculiar aunt go? She smelled of sour udders and wool, and we ran from her hugs, and now, well, we're sorry. They say she was taken to the city. We found her in the school gym filled with old folks sick on a mat. She asked, is this prison? Well, if it isn't, why can't I go out? And she asked, what happened to my animals? That's where a mountain ant with a sheep's lock in her black hair went. And I climbed atop the well in the woods and shouted a secret. Fuck you, motherfuckers. She locked away the house with her, the meadow, the hill, the dog, and me. They say a young soldier took her. She locked away the hay barn with her, the ram, the smokehouse, the plum orchard, the snow, and the summer, and me. That's where our mountain aunt went. She didn't come back. They say my sweetheart took her, or someone who looks like him. Later on, the Third Army arrived too and burned the house down. The meadow, the hill, the dog, and me. The ram, the plum orchard, the snow, and the summer, and me. The next one is from Dead Letter Office. This one came out earlier this summer in June, and it's by another Croatian poet, writer called Marko Pogačar. And the poem that I'm going to read is titled Magellan Home Alone, obviously after the famous explorer. Magellan Home Alone. You woke up sweaty and naked, muscles cramped from a drinking spree that lasted too long, and sailed in the direction of the fridge. Sweaty and naked, an explorer in search of a new world. Turned out, the world is a watermelon. Seen from afar through a silk stocking, under its core bloody magma, sugar cooled into envy, tosses seeds in its sweet love. And inside each seed, like in a town hall, the dead man keeps court with his habit of silence, his test of stillness, until a knife floods rooms with the syrup of warm spring nights, and clerks, abandoned by everyone, run before the first drops under the roof of a provincial post office. From there, the hoity and dry watch pigs swallow the world, and the storm rinses out its map. And they ask, how does so much rain fit into the sky above such a small town? So yeah, the world is a watermelon. This is my first book, Small Crimes. I think I will just read one poem from it, and then if you like it, you can buy the book. Okay, so this one is called For Yugoslavia's More Fortunate Ones. I was born in Yugoslavia, a country that no longer exists. And while that might sound a little strange, it really isn't so much, because that part of the world, northern Adriatic coast, the Republic of Croatia today, was ruled by a number of larger powers over the course of history. So, for example, my grandmother lived in 4 different countries throughout her life. Anyway, near the end of the poem, I will say Dobra pička. What it means, it's what men used to catcall women on the street back in the day when I was a kid. Literally, it means a good-looking cunt. I hope Facebook doesn't shut us down now. Anyway, for Yugoslavia's more fortunate ones. You killed time and your livers under viaducts, vigilantes of underpasses in thick vinegar haze, puking by the roadside over tin foil, empty bottles, toilet paper tubes, buttercups, morning glories. Days welded, onions sweated in wood crates at the market, fish gutted, their scales thrown back to the sea, that lax bluish rag between the port and smokestacks, the burn-off. You watched buses start routes at 5 a.m., considered yourselves above the proletariat that waited somber under fiberglass stops for the bus's concertina doors to take them, then watched those soot-crusted vehicles bend through intestinal streets, past posters of Yugoslav bands, their multi-ethnic disco quaver, past the greenery of dumpsters. You, vigilante drifters at school parks under the carob trees, habitually fucking on beds of sun-scorched papers. And you, stooped by the bedding shop, on its walls the fixed smile of Lady D, yellowed centerfolds, Sabrina splashing about in her white bandeau bikini, Remember that Roma boy who for years offered dobra pička to passers-by. His sister, a reasonably priced premenstrual pussy. The two of them, arms linked, beautiful together like two black orchids. So that's about 7 poems left to go, and the rest will be sort of newish stuff. I will start with the second section with a prose poem that is basically about how would I say, fixing your teeth when you don't have health insurance, right? And how creative one might get. The speaker may or may not be me, and I may or may not be able to give you tips on how to fix your teeth if you don't have health insurance. But here we go. Bulgarian dentist in my kitchen. She pulled out my wisdom teeth, Emir says, $40 a piece, in Kemal's living room, while I sat in the sofa like a king. Clutching an Adidas duffel in one hand and the wooden rail in the other, she now huffs up the back steps to my kitchen. The black scroll doormat is embarrassingly dusty. The neighbor keeps a gutted washer by his door, scrap metal cinder blocks stacked like tiered cake. It's how his lean-to life is big. I wait for the zubolekarka and pick dead leaves out of planters. Mina, my landlady, walks out from her basement hair salon and says, "Oh, hi, you work at my dentist office. How you know each other?" I smile at her and mumble, "Small world," and slide in to fix coffee. Turkish, with sugar, my dentist says, 2 big spoons, and starts disemboweling her gym bag, pulls picks, probes, drills tiny mirrors onto my kitchen table delicately as if she was pulling treasure from the belly of a large fish. I shoo the boys into the bedroom. "Go watch a movie. A friend of a friend visiting. It won't be long. Just stay here." And I snatch their desk lamp. The dentist, now done with coffee, adjusts the headlamp above her brows and turns on the blinding flashlight on her phone. A slender watch cuts into the flesh of her wrist like tight twine. "Open wide, sunshine," she says, angling over me. "How long you been in America? How you teach English?" Then proceeds to poke and scrape, babble about her old practice in Sofia, her new no-good boyfriend, her knees swollen, so many water it hurts. The burr machine pops and clicks, sparks a tarnished bark. "A bargain," she says, "from internet." Wedged between the fridge and the table, my back damp against the wall, I am a silent fish. The kid's desk lamp is a light for night fishing. She hooks her finger into my cheek, and soon I sink into the pain as if it were the Adriatic. I wish I were 9. And this, Laura, our school dentist. Lovely Laura. All of Yugoslavia knew her, or most towns had one like her. A bottle blonde with locks falling on her lab coat and her cosmic cleavage, her neck stretched as she held the phone to her shoulder. The coiled cord spun around her feet, and as Laura stepped over it and blew out puffs of cigarette smoke, hair brushed against her lips as plump and red as starfish. She tapped our cheeks to open wider, and from that smoke and gossip, she drilled sugar out of our watering mouths. I patch broken tooth, the dentist says, her cyclops forehead burrowed, is $50. Other tooth need root canal. But sunshine, if that hurt, I fix that too. I just need to fix my knee first. And since I'm talking, reading about watering mouths, the next poem was sort of inspired by the color obsession of the 80s. And in particular, my experience of that as a kid through candy, and how much of the candy that we had back home, working class socialist kids, was really plain, just plain candy. And kids whose parents had a little bit more money, they would eat these colorful chewing gums, chew colorful gummy candy and so on and so forth. But we had a little fix for that. And that was, we would take a simple plain white chewing gum stick, and we would also take colored pencils, and then we would just bite the tip of the colored pencil and make the chewing gum be whatever color we preferred. So that is where what this poem was inspired by, in the color grinding gears. In the pre-war and in the post-war, we made colors. Usually in the school bathroom between classes, a swarm of girls crowding graffiti-covered walls. Some of us entered one of the 3 stalls in pairs, one pulling jeans down to her knees, her shirt a wrinkled valance over her snatch, babbling as she eased herself off, the thin piss streaming down the porcelain bowl, while the other, cigarette between her lips, added to the wall art. Don't pour fucking confidence into me, I'll drown. Others by the sink bit waxy tips of colored pencils, crushed them into the pale stick of chewing gum, torching it into something bright, explosive, reckless. Between teeth, the meat red pigment in the flesh of the gum blossomed into a striped carnation, a green nib bust into a spiky horse chestnut. Meanwhile, our mothers picked stones out of green coffee beans, dyed our clothing in soup pots. In those years, we had a case of color madness, busied ourselves concealing our featherless void until everything was disco fresh. All was sunny forsythia, foxy foxglove, the provocative purple of sage, lilac, blue lilac. God, lilac so blue is the one color I still notice, mouth still watering. So the next poem is titled Boutonniere. Boutonniere is that little flower or a little spray of flowers that usually is worn in the buttonhole on the suit. And let me see if there is anything else. That's it. Boutonniere. The news says, after we die, we will know we are dead. The brain, an afternoon growing faint, dim like a woman touched by an unwanted hand. At the shutdown, the heart is a beam, a transmission to the mind, that odorless ranunculus gently wilting on the black lapel. At times, the heart is a possum on the shoulder of a road, a handful of wool sting an open mouth, playing dead. Like me a month ago, after this cowboy, a real American cowboy said, honey, sign your book and let me hug you. Then, as if branding a calf, clapped my ass. Once, twice, 3 fat times. Or while at the school park during recess, we'd eat mortadella on white bread, jump over elastics, and men in myrtle would watch us and beat themselves stiff. The drunk soldier who humped me, a teenage waitress from behind like a wet dog, then walked away looking like he needed to take a dump. And the dentist with the ponytail who cast a cool shadow over the dental chair and filled my mouth with his Listerine tongue. Then sent me photos of a woman on her bed. That bitch, he said, his dick a meek, wrinkled slug slack across the arch of her sleeping foot. His fiancée. Or when my father pulled at the throat of my shirt and I folded over the sofa, arms across chest, and listened to his belt tear the air like paper. Today, Clouds ride the chrome bow of the sky, twist their white throats. My son bolts out the bathroom in his blue pajama pants like a triumphant fish vying through an underwater forest. And he says, "Mama, look, I have one hair. It's so long." And opens his small armpit to me, as pale, soft, and fragrant as a sea flower. Four more, if you're counting. So the next one is a poem that I read, that I wrote for an editor who sat at a reading of mine a few years ago. And after the reading, he approached me and asked me if I would send some poems to his magazine. And I said that I would be, that I'd be happy to do it. About a week after that, he started emailing me late at night, and in his emails, he asked me not to send him any poems that contain the word cunt. At first, I wasn't sure exactly how to respond to that email. So I just said, well, how would you feel if I sent you poems that contain the word ass or semen? And he said, oh, semen would be fine. So I wrote him a poem and got it published in a magazine much better than his. And I had a lot of fun writing this poem. So I'm going to just read it for you guys. To the editor who asked I send poems without the word cunt. Instead, I send you a lily, tubular and fuzzy, and a pink piggy bank with tight folded bills. Two palms pressed together, a mood ring, a sun-ripened fig, a bowl of fresh water, a watertight hull, a port, a skirt blown back, the blessings of Our Lady of Shipwrecks, a daughter, a shadow, a chin doubled in joy, the skip and shift of a kite in flight, a dirty boot. I send you a cockpit and a pilot dropping bombs, clear to cross runway, clittering over the transceiver. Just not the monosyllable. Its sound, hairy, needs no editorial trimming or your desk lamp to hold down the night. It isn't bothered by your saying the word semen is fine. It's okay, baby boy. We all choose how we fill the emptiness inside us. And I've got three more poems for the end. The following one is a breakup poem, and it's titled Epithelium, which is a traditional, how would I put it, poem written for a wedding ceremony. Epithelium. Instead of the wedding, weather took place. That landless squatter moved into your bones, built its house in one night. The ocean pulled back its white scalloped lace. The thin keels of ships snapped like broken spines. The seabed sunk, the sky heaved into it. Magpies strutted a stiff, guard-like swagger. All the bread loaves lay upside down. Cows wandered in wide circles. That midnight of our second year, every broken thing was washed away. A kind of eviction. The sky, the land, the ocean, and its endless, fitful rocking, falling, roiling, until there was nothing, not even air, or those thrashing voices of ours, drowning like a litter of kittens. The next poem is titled Nocturne. And it was probably one of the first poems that I read, that I wrote, that sort of started this series of poems that were primarily inspired by dreams, my own dreams. some of which I published in this issue of Willow Springs, but this is the one that sort of like jump-started that cycle. Nocturne. I watch the sky hang above walls, another night like a vinyl raincoat over the city. On an empty side street, a kebab stand flickers like a tired lighthouse, but there's no sea, just pavement and footsteps unlike the hammer of waves. A woman hobbles over, asks the night cook for a smoke. She's shit-faced, and so is he. Their English sounds shredded, and I fall in love with them. She pulls up her white dress, climbs on the counter, and starts washing her snatch in the sink, gracious like a small animal. From here, it looks like he drinks that water instead of the woman what washes off her. And maybe the absence of the moon, or of the bombs, or the cold. This sudden religious cold is messing with this picture, but I like this tenderness. How gently he stoops to offer simple lapping. And in the background, the grease sputtering like a prophet with a speech impediment. And the last poem that I will read tonight is, I actually wrote it for my mom. She worked as a nurse her entire life. So when my sister and I were little, I remember her being tired a lot. And I just remember the bedtime routine. So this is it, Mother's Bedtime Routine. Now she strokes my sister's hair. Now she holds her feet. Now she tells us of rabbits huddling together in a burrow, the war wind howling and the hungry fox treading through snow, and a witch who lives on the rooftop across the street, who is also hungry and who preys on sleepless children. Now a cloud gathers above her forehead, and from it forms a well. Now I lean over that well, and on the reflective water, I see her dusting owl figurines in the house of misfortune. And that's it for me tonight. Thank you so much for listening. And I would love to have a chat with you guys if you have any questions.
So y'all, if you go ahead and put your questions in the chat box, probably easier than the Q&A. And I'll also, for those of you listening on Facebook Live, I'll be checking those as well and writing them in the chat. And just to get us going, Andrea, I do have one question for you. You have this really interesting movement between like this kind of grittiness and then the surreal, and they're kind of pushed up against one another. And I wondered if you wouldn't talk about that and maybe what poets you're reading who are doing something similar, or just discuss that a little bit.
I think it's kind of inevitable. I sort of grew up in a culture and in a place and in a time that was very gritty. So I can't escape that. I think it's a sort of like aesthetics that is within me. But at the same time, I'm also drawn to artists in general, not necessarily just poets, but artists in general who really, really, really appreciate reality as it is, and who don't try to change reality necessarily, but sort of see every object as magical. And the one person that comes to mind, honestly, is, a few people. Pasolini, the Italian filmmaker, poet as well, Dennis Johnson, C.D. Wright, people like that. But again, the dreaminess or the sort of like need to maybe escape the world, I think it's also just simply part of my nature. It's not something that I am deliberately pursuing. But it's also kind of like when you make dessert, you always, regardless of how sweet a dessert is that you're making, usually you need a little bit of salt in it, like a pinch of salt. So regardless of, even if I'm writing something that would be traditionally seen as more dreamy or lyrical or something like that, I think it still needs some anchoring to this world to actually be palatable. So, Polly, the participants in the reading, are they primarily your students?
No, they're some are my students, and so a lot of them are the Willow Springs staff, okay, and some of the grad students in the MFA program, and some of the undergrads. It's pretty much what I'm seeing. Oh, we're getting a bunch of questions.
Okay, cool. Oh, by the way, there's Willow Springs people. Thank you guys for selecting my poems for publication. Really, I'm glad you didn't fall asleep and just put them aside. Madison Flint is asking, what was the most interesting about the town and country you grew up in? Great question, and the answer would be terribly long, honestly. There's a really interesting history where I grew up, in the sense that, how would I say, the East and the West sort of meets in the Balkans. But okay, I'll just give you one thing. It's the city that I grew up in, Rijeka, has got a very strong musical history. And there is one time period that is particularly interesting about my hometown, and that is after World War I, when European map was redrawn after the war. My hometown used to be under Italy before the war, and there was an Italian poet, Gabriele D'Annunzio was his name. He was also a nationalist, Italian nationalist. He really wanted Fiume, which was the Italian name for my hometown, to be annexed back to Italy. Italians were like, no, we can't take that. Fiume is going to be with Yugoslavia, so on and so forth. What happens is Gabriele D'Annunzio puts together, I don't like the word eccentric, but I can't think of another one right now. He puts together a small army of people. He was some kind of minor World War I figure. He dropped some pamphlets from a plane. Anyway, supposedly he had a seance with his lover at a Venetian cemetery, put together an army of people, and marched to Fiume and took over the city. And for the next almost 2 years, he ruled the city. And at the end, the Italians had to kick him out. But what was interesting during that time is that this guy was really, he sort of set up this government where the governing principle was music and poetry. And so what he did every morning is he would get out on the balcony in the center of the town and recite his poetry. And every evening he would have free concerts that people attended. The city ended up being sort of like a gathering place for just all the irregular people and artists and unusual characters of all kinds. So that was kind of cool, interesting, except that he was also a terribly problematic person. In fact, he inspired Mussolini with the balcony presence. He inspired later on Hitler with the greetings and some of the clothing stuff and so on and so forth. So that's one interesting thing about my city. But aside from that, if you were to go today, it's just a gorgeous looking place on the Adriatic, and the people are cool and fun. Jody's asking, how has the intersection of the culture you grew up in combined with your immigration experience in America affected your poetry? For example, does it expand your imagery, or do you dive more into what is now absent? Great question. I would like to think that it expands. Well, actually, I think it might do more. I'm not exactly sure. I think that the place where I grew up in, the environment, the sea, and the geography of the place is something that I carry inside me, and I don't think I could ever tire of writing about that place alone. But I also, having been living in the American South for quite a while now, I have written a lot of poems that are inspired by, this place as well. So I'd like to think it expanded. As far as my immigrant experience, you just see things from a different angle, I think, a little bit differently, for sure. What might seem like an everyday thing you take for granted because you have seen it a million times, somebody who hasn't seen it before will notice the difference. I hope that answers. Josh Henderson is asking, I recently came across a quote from Borges that I found fascinating. The original is unfaithful to the translation. What is your view of a translation's relationship to the original text, especially in poetry? It's just like, it's kind of funny how much when people talk about translation, how eager they are or how quick they are to talk about the faithfulness, or the other one is like the famous Robert Frost saying that poetry is what's lost in translation, or the famous translator trader quote as well. I don't think that we need to look at translations in that way. In fact, I think it's really dangerous to think about translations that way, because if we start thinking about what we are losing from the original, and we talk ourselves into, what's the point of doing translation? Because at the end of the day, this is not absolutely faithful. It is not absolutely truthful to the original. We're basically robbing ourselves from the experience of ever experiencing that original text, right? And I honestly think that some of it is really dangerous because it sort of puts too much emphasis on this purity of that original draft, which is problematic, because I think it's sort of in between the lines, kind of a nationalistic approach to language. I think that what translation does, it's a very inclusive way of adding to the literature that we already have. So what is a translation's relationship to the original text, especially in poetry? Well, it's I don't have a quick a quote to tell you what that relationship is, but I can tell you this, that it is impossible to fully be translating a text from one language to another where they completely duplicate. In fact, there are words that we have in English language that we don't have in other languages, and vice versa. So we have to keep that in mind. What happens during translation is what I imagine is a little bit like renovating a house. You go in and you strip everything down to the point that you get familiar with the interior structure of that text, down to the beams and insides of walls and so on and so forth. So you kind of like need to just totally break it down, and then you rebuild it in another language. I think it's a wonderful practice, and that alone has actually, I think, influenced my writing more than anything else, more than reading other poets, more than maybe my own previous experiences and where I grew up and whatnot. And the other thing is also that throughout history, poets have always translated each other's work. So I think it's a really important practice. If you're a good poet, you're going to be translating or at least reading translations. David is asking, do you have any other major experiences with censorship or any notably unfavorable reactions to the language in your poems? Nothing comes to mind at the moment. I think that most people are if they don't like it, they keep it to themselves. They don't really approach me. But what I do notice is that people are usually much more curious to read my work and to listen to me reading my work, rather than listen to me read translations of other people. And that's something that makes me feel a little bit sad, because I think that those translations are equally important, if not more. Jen is asking, what drew you to translation work? Well, I hit the point where I was finishing my MFA, and I sort of had the draft of my first book done, and I was still working on it. But every so often I felt entirely tapped out. And at the same time, I was absolutely aware of my desire to continue learning how to write better. And I just didn't know how to do that on my own fast enough. So I actually approached translation as something that would help me get out of my own limitations as a writer, and to allow myself to basically leave my headspace aside and to work on somebody else's work, and to sort of live inside someone else's poems. And that has helped me a lot in terms of because you don't really know another person's poem so well until you start translating it, because then you see how many choices and decisions that original poet made, and it makes you aware of the kind of stuff and the kind of tendencies you have and the limitations of your own work. So that's basically, I try to sort of keep the windows open of my own writing by translating other people. What is your grandmother's name? Which poem did my grandmother? I have two. Which one are we? One was Ivana, and the other one was Slavica. But I called him Nona. Oh, yeah. Okay. The grandmother in four countries. Okay, this was my this is kind of funny. All right, this is my mom's grandma. No, sorry, my mother's mom. So she was a cool lady. She was a tough lady, and I'll tell you a few things about her. She was when she was in her teens. She grew up in what used to be Italy then, and one day there was an Italian soldier that was going through the village where she was living, and that guy approached my great grandmother, so my grandmother's mother, and he said, "Hey, I kind of like your daughter, and I'd like to marry her." And my grandmother kind of didn't really like him because he was old and ugly, but she didn't have really much choice. And her mother said, "Listen, you got to go with this guy because you're going to have a much better life than if you stay behind." So I hear that she left with him, and then he supposedly had a whole other family. He lived in the Istrian Peninsula. And so she ended up being his second wife. They ended up moving back to where she was from, and they had 4 boys. And all 4 of the boys were killed during World War II, various ways. One he was in the army. One of them was in the hospital, and he was walking by the window, and he got hit by a sniper. And one was a baby, and he was in the house with her in his crib when the house was bombed. And as the house was bombed, she fell underneath the sewing machine that she was using at the time, and that saved her life. The baby was killed. And her first husband actually was also this is really traumatic, but I don't want to bring anybody down. He was killed by the neighbors because they suspected that he was a fascist. So one morning they just knocked on the door and called him out and took him out into the woods and executed him. And later on came back to my grandma's house for a cup of coffee. I have a poem about this in the book. But yeah, she was pretty tough. And then she married my grandfather and had 3 daughters, the oldest of which is my mom. So yeah, that was my grandmother. Yeah, I think these are all the questions. I'm not sure if I'm missing. There's a Q&A. Do you have phrases, images such as disembowel her gym bag, awaiting homes, or does each work generate itself? Yeah, it does make sense. I come up with them as I'm writing. I don't have a purse with images sitting around. I do notice images. I think a lot of that stuff honestly comes. This is where being a second language speaker, a non-native speaker, comes in really, really handy, because sometimes you're simply short for words and you can't remember how to say something. And so you're constantly fishing for it or trying to think of different ways of saying something. So yeah, that just comes up by itself or during revision or something like that. And then if I'm stuck for images or words or just different ways of saying things, I always kind of go back to seascapes and sort of my mild obsession with the sea. And there's always something there. I don't know if that helps explain. What are the names of the countries your grandmother lived in? Well, it was in Italy. It was the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, or what was it called? Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. It was Yugoslavia. She lived in Croatia, and I think it was at one point, it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I would have to check the history books.
Do we have any other questions? And we're, Andrea, I just want to let you know that we are getting, there are quite a few people making comments on the Facebook page. And so you'll want to take a look at those at some point, and I can copy those for you. But there are just a lot of really nice comments about your work. So.
Thank you. It's really something else to be talking to my own face.
Anybody else? All right. Well, I want to thank Andrea. Any other parting words?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for organizing the reading, and thank you for managing the tech stuff. That's intimidating. And more than anything, thank you for publishing my poems in this gorgeous issue. I adore this cover. It's probably my favorite cover ever.
Very suitable for your poems, I think.
What did you say?
The cover is very suitable for your poems.
Thank you. Thank you. I really like it a lot. That's it. I wish I could see you all and have this reading in person, but this is wonderful, and it's a privilege. So thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and join us again when we have another one. And Andrea, thank you so much for staying up so late and sharing your work and the work of others. And everybody, go to Andrea's website where you can get copies of her books and her translations.
Thank you, Polly.